My name is Judith Laredo, and I am the Assistant Commissioner for P16 Initiatives. And I want to thank all of you, for those of you who flew in this morning, drove in this morning, for those of you out in cyberspace, in your offices, for those of you who stayed over after a board meeting, we thank you for taking the time to come and dialogue with us about an issue that we think is very important, and I know that you as well, because of the roles that you hold in your universities. Pardon me. We at the coordinating board have been very, very actively engaged over the last month and a half in looking at where we are with closing the gaps. I don't think there's anyone in the audience or out there in that internet world who doesn't know what that is. And it is right around the corner. We are in essence, three semesters off from reaching that magical number of 630,000 students matriculating into post-secondary education. And of course, looking at that success factor as well. I'm here to tell you that the success factor is doing exceptionally well. And I think you've already achieved that. But we're not achieving participation as we were. We were doing very well with participation, but the economy, I think, has had an impact. And so we have a lot of students that are leaving high school and going to work. Where did we ever think that parts of Texas would have oil and business would be booming, and students could leave high school and really earn very nice incomes without going into further certificate, associate, or four-year degree training? And so there is a real concern that we may not make those numbers. Anything can happen, but unfortunately we don't know what that future holds. And so that is why, based under commissioners asking us, Dr. Paredes asking us to please become extremely cautious and actively involved on a weekly basis. We as a team meet every week with there's probably 20 at the table to look at this issue and to see where we are and what we might need to do to help you. You're the institutions. You all are the ones that are recruiting, accepting these students. We sit up here in our little building, and we don't want you to think that we're not here engaged and worried and thinking about what your efforts are doing and how we might play a part. So that is why we call this meeting today. You have an agenda in front of you. We're going to have some e-questions. We're going to have some other questions that we're going to ask you to dialogue in. Some of you have a mic in front of you, and don't worry if you don't, because Natalie Coffey in the back has a mic in her hand, and she will come around. We will be taking notes of this meeting, because this is what drives our dialogue when we meet every Friday with what we call our war team in our negotiation room on the second floor, where we are actively looking at data and looking at the scenarios. So to the right of me is Jane Caldwell, and Jane is in our financial aid office. I don't know your exact title, Jane.
Director of Grants and Special Programs.
And Dr. Julie Eklund, you know, is from the number area. And she's got a major charge in that area, and that is why she is going to be leading the effort today in discussion around data. Dr. Gary Tamerlan is the Deputy Associate Commissioner for Community Colleges. And he just joined our staff recently. You know who I am, Jose Rios. And Jose, you'll have to give your title, because I don't know what your title is.
Assistant Director.
I know we go to him for everything. He seems to be the answer, the go person. And to our far left is another individual who's got the expertise in that federal financial aid.
My name is Lynn Kenyon. I'm the Assistant Director of Grants and Special Programs.
So there's a reason why we're all up here, and that's because we're all engaged from a different aspect. I'm going to turn it over. I hope that people in cyberspace are connected and you can hear us. If by chance you need to do something in your office, I would ask that you mute your telephone. But be careful if you have music. Don't put us on hold, because then we'll be either hearing music or dancing to music. So I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Julie Eklund, who will proceed with the beginning, and then we'll lead into our questions.
Thank you very much, Dr. Laredo. I'm happy to be here today with all of you and all of you who are listening in. After I do my presentation, I'm actually going to be responsible for the questions, so you'll see my email address up there. So if you have any questions during my presentation or during the remainder of the meeting, questions or comments, please be sure to email them to me at julie.eklund@thecb.state.tx.us. So I will be taking those questions, and questions we're unable to get to today. If that does happen, we'll definitely get a response back to you. The other thing I also wanted to mention is that the meeting, as you're probably aware, is being recorded and being broadcast. So just please be aware of that as you ask your questions and make your comments. We're actually very fortunate today to be here with you the day after a board meeting, because several things happened at the board meeting yesterday. And we presented, in fact, Dr. David Gardner presented a Closing the Gaps update, which looks a little different and looks a little better than the update which we presented in January at our last board meeting. And I'm going to be able to share some of that with you today, which I was unable to share with the community college folks. We had community college enrollment and technical college enrollment managers with us a couple of weeks ago, along with institutional research folks and our accountability peer group measures. We combined 2 meetings with them. So this is actually our second time for meeting with enrollment managers. I think we learned a lot from them, but we understand that universities are different in many ways from community and technical colleges. So we thought it would be worthwhile to have the 2 separate meetings. But we will share what we learned with them. I'm going to ask for the first PowerPoint. So what I have today is I have a PowerPoint that I prepared that has information about the fall enrollment analysis that we did, the numbers that we had as of this winter, and then some of the new information that we have I will be providing in the second PowerPoint, which is an excerpt of the PowerPoint that was given at the board meeting yesterday. So I want to show you where we were, where we've come, and most importantly, and the reason we're all here, where we need to go in terms of closing the gaps. Okay, so we're going to start with number 1. You created the new folder? Look. Okay. Okay, it may be in the community college meeting folder. Yeah, let's see if it's there. Okay. Yes, okay, I think we're there. Okay, so here is the enrollment analysis that, in fact, we first did in December for a committee meeting. So I'll quickly walk through this. Okay, we have been looking at enrollment from several different angles. Dual credit, which of course is a large part of the enrollments at community colleges, and a very small but growing part of the enrollment at universities, probably 3 or 4%. We're looking at new students, for first-time entering students, and changes in those enrollment numbers. We're looking at continuing students and persistence, which continues to be a very important element of our participation numbers. And we're looking at returning students and focusing on students who are stopping out, hoping they return, and if they don't, we've got some initiatives and strategies for trying to encourage them to return. We've tried to look at where the decline has been, what some of the contributing factors have been, and we've also got some new population projections that came in from the state data center this fall, late this fall, in fact, and they account for 2010 census data and project out to 2015 and beyond that, and they actually make a little bit of difference as we look at some of the data around our Texas population and our enrolled Texas population. Okay, here's the numbers that we had in the fall. Public universities were up 7,000 students, but you see the big drop was at public 2-year colleges. That's probably not a huge surprise because of changes in the economy, but we've also seen slowed enrollment at the universities. Health-related institutions, you can see a slight increase. Again, very slight increase at independent colleges and universities. And then we see career colleges at 101,000 enrollments there, and we're going to see a change when we see the new data today. So you can continue, and then self-funded students who are included in this count. Okay, so as of December, we were at, or this past fall, with the data we had available at that time, we had 540 additional students enrolled, and our goal is to enroll from 2,000 630,000 additional students. That will be for a total of 1,650,000 students, because we had 1,020,000 students enrolled in 2000 when the Closing the Gaps plan was first developed. So we're looking at 3 years to get to an additional 630,000 beyond where we were in 2000. Okay, next slide. We're going to talk a fair amount today about Hispanic students, because that's where we need the most growth and where we're not seeing the kind of enrollment growth that we need to reach our Closing the Gaps goal. Next slide. This is information about where the change happened. This is for all institutions. You can see enrollment is down quite a bit in South Texas. It's up a little bit in the Gulf Coast. Upper East, it's down. Metroplex area, it's down. So this is just a regional perspective of where we are with enrollment. And we're up 43 students in the High Plains. So anyway, that shows you some of the change that we've seen. We've looked carefully at changes in the unemployment rate, some federal and state policy changes, especially related to Pell Grants. We've looked at what's been happening with dual credit enrollment, and that has in fact continued to go up. So we're at almost 100,000 students who are dually enrolled at high school and college. That was for this past fall. I think it was at about 94,000 the previous fall. We've taken a look at high school seniors. At the time this was done, we didn't have the high school graduate data from 2012 from TEA. We now have that data. Those high school seniors enrolling in higher ed, we've seen a slight percentage drop, a 1% percentage drop of those who graduated and enrolled. The numbers have been fairly flat. They were up just a little bit. So we are seeing a little slowing of enrollment, though when we look at the data for previous years, it looks like we're going to start to have some larger jumps again. We've looked at persistence into master's and doctoral programs, and I'll show you a slide related to that in a minute. Tuition and fees and how those have grown, and I mentioned population estimates. Okay? Here's some information about unemployment. You can see we've had a drop, and you can see that trend line is similar to what we see at especially community and technical colleges in terms of their trend line. When we met with the community colleges, one institution mentioned to me that they'd done a study looking at Pell and the unemployment rate in their area, and they actually sent me this individual sent me the data after our meeting, and it was interesting to see that the line was almost exactly the same following the unemployment rate and the students enrolling who had Pell Grants. The dual credit line looked very different. He removed that subset, and when he looked at the non-Pell students, there was a slight difference in terms of what that looked like. So we thought that was interesting information to share. Okay. And this is a slide for you folks, for the universities. What we saw as the unemployment increased, more students seemed to be continuing right on to graduate school. So what we did is we looked at some data from students who earned a bachelor's and then went right in to graduate school, and you can see, there's again, as there are more jobs out there, that trend line is starting to go down a little bit. So that might explain some of the slowed growth that we see in terms of the universities, that we don't have as many students continuing right on. They're perhaps more able to find employment, and students have decided to work a little before they consider graduate school. Okay. Next slide. This has to do with the population projections, the new population projections from the data center. This has the 2010 census data, and it has the change from what was projected in 2007 for where we were going to be in terms of population. I think that's when they did, I'm going to say 07 or 08. I'm pretty sure it's 07 when they did the most recent projection before they had that 2010 census data. And you can see that they over-projected for the Hispanic population, and just slightly for the white and African American population, under-projected for the other. And that group includes a lot of Asians in Texas. Okay. The other thing about the other group is now that they have new categories with the ability for individuals to report as multiracial, we've found that the other category has grown, and you've probably seen that at your institutions. I know I see that in the accountability data from your institutions. So this is similar information. It just breaks it out a little bit more. And let me see, I'm sorry, and it moves forward not just from where we were at the census date compared to where they were projecting us to be, but this talks about moving out into 2012, 2015, and 2020, what the projections look like and what they look like now. So again, where you see a lot of the change there is the Hispanic population, which does not mean that the Hispanic population is going down in Texas, which I'm sure you're aware of. It means that it's not growing quite as quickly as they were predicting before we had the 2010 census data. Okay, because it is in fact growing. And then when this was presented, we didn't have the high school graduates. We've learned a little bit from them. So we are seeing a little slowdown with the high school graduates enrolling, as well as with folks in our overall enrollment in FTIC. We're going to talk about flex entry students today because that's an area where we're really seeing a change, and we learned something important from the community college group. We're going to have some new employment data in June, and that'll be helpful, as well as some career school data, additional career school data that we now have available for 2011. So this September we'll have 2012 career school data, but we have some new career school data that's recently come in this winter that we're going to share with you today, and we're going to add those students to our participation counts. Okay. So the next slide, number 2. So now we're going to move into the update that was at the board meeting yesterday, which has some good news, but we still have a ways to go, and we want to make sure we stay focused on the goal. Okay. Next slide. Okay. So here we have our updates for our totals, and we have added a category, and we've seen a change in terms of the career colleges. So you can see we're up about 23,500 students or so at the career colleges. That's because we got the data in for them this winter, and the enrollments were higher than what we were projecting last fall and from the data that we had. As many of you are aware, we now have a career school accountability system that also includes non-Texas public institutions that aren't ICUTs but that have a presence in Texas. So that can be out-of-state public institutions that have some kind of a presence in Texas, places like University of Phoenix, a range of different institutions there that aren't our publics or our ICUTs. We now have that in our accountability system. We have a more formal data collection process with them, and our data is getting better that we're getting from those career schools. I also think that they have seen growth. And so we were happy to see that with our most recent data collection from them, we are actually at 124,465, and we're adding that to our fall numbers, though that is actually for a previous fall from them. But we assume we'll continue to see growth there, so we included the 2011. Flex entry. Okay, these are students who are showing up after the census date. For the most part, this is at community colleges. That flex entry number is unduplicated. So those are students that we have in our system that were not enrolled before the census date last fall, but that enrolled last fall after the census date. The reason we didn't have this data in December and January is because those flex entry students don't get reported to us until the spring CBM 001 report, where there's an indication, yes, here was somebody who was flex who started after the census date. So we gathered that data, we unduplicated it because obviously we didn't want to include students who were otherwise enrolled by the census date, and the numbers were quite high. We went back and looked at where we were with flex in 2000. I think we'd grown about 200% in terms of flex. We started talking about that, thinking about that. What does that mean? When we got to the meeting with the community and technical colleges, the first thing that someone said, and they all nodded their head, and then it made sense to us, was that as they have tightened up their late registration policies and not allowed late registration the way they used to, they have seen a lot more students coming in flex. Because what they discovered is if a student shows up after a week or so into the semester, they've missed the beginning, they're in a hurry, they're just trying to figure out what they're going to do, they're less likely to succeed. They had lots of data that looked like that. So they basically have said, you need to register before the semester starts. That said, when they had students show up, the first day of class, the first week, and say, here I am, I want to enroll, a lot of those students were directed towards flex entry programs. That's fine. We have a program that's starting in October that will work for you. In addition to that population, and I think Gary will support there also have been a lot of students who, or a lot of community colleges who are structuring classes more like what you might see at some of the career colleges. So some of the, 1 month compressed courses, a student comes in, does one course, finishes that, does another, might start in October, might start in November, really not on the typical semester schedule that we see. That has also grown. So between those two categories, we've seen a big jump in flex, and in discussing that, the determination was made that, hey, these students are, this is a population we didn't include in the past because it was small. It has grown. These are students who are enrolled in the fall who probably would have been with us in a regular semester if we hadn't seen these changes and how institutions do business. And so we've added those to our numbers. So therefore, we've added an additional 60+ thousand students to our participation numbers. So the next slide shows you that we're getting closer to reaching our 630,000 participation goal. We're not there yet, and when we see this, when you look at the slowdown that we had this year from last year, it's important, again, that we keep our eye on the goal moving forward, and we really need everyone's help for that. Okay, next slide. Okay, this just shows, this is going to tie into some of the allocations that I'm going to talk about in a few minutes, but this shows that we're actually ahead in terms of our other students and our African American students from where our targets were. This does not by any means mean that we need fewer students from the other category or from the African American category. We're very proud and happy that Texas has surpassed the goals that we set for participation for those groups. So obviously we want to keep growing and moving forward, and that's going to help us reach our goals. But you can see where we're behind is our Hispanic target. So those negative numbers that you see, or I shouldn't say negative numbers, but the fact that we're beyond our goals for African American and other, that's going to affect the allocation that we're going to look at in a little while, and hopefully seeing this slide will make some of that make sense when we walk through that. Okay. Dr. Leder mentioned we have the Situation Room, or we've called it the War Room. We've had several names for it, the Negotiation Room, the Strategy Room. We're still trying out names, but the important thing is we're all getting together to talk about these issues. There's a lot of programs that are going on. I'm not going to go into detail about that because I think that will come up in our discussion later, but there's a lot of things that are happening that we're talking about in terms of trying to get to our goals. Okay, and one thing that we're doing is we're working with data in different kinds of ways than we have before. We've gotten some more sophisticated mapping programs, and we're spending some time thinking about what would be useful to map. And one thing I want to stress, we are more than happy to get any advice, information, suggestions from all of you about ways that we can slice and dice the data to help us better understand our enrollment trends, our success trends, what's happening in higher education in Texas. What this particular map does is the coloration changes show the overall Hispanic population in the state where it's located, so the areas that have a higher percentage of a Hispanic population. But then the percentages of the map, they show the percent of the population in that region, the percent of the Hispanic population in that region that's enrolled in higher education. So what it's showing is that in the areas that have higher Hispanic populations, they are doing a better job getting Hispanics enrolled in higher education. The areas that have a lower percentage of Hispanic population, where we would expect them or want them to be at the same percentage from those Hispanic students getting the same percentage into higher education, they're not doing as well for their residents. Okay, so this is by region of residence. This isn't by where students go to school. So it's not, hey, Hispanic students are choosing to go to areas with Hispanic serving institutions. What this shows is for people from that region, you have a lower percentage that are enrolling of the Hispanics if there's a lower percentage of Hispanics overall in the population. So I think that's something that's interesting that this shows. And then we had a couple other, if you go to the next one, this has to do with high school to college, and this map shows the percentage of students by county who graduate from high school and enroll in higher education. Interesting that some of the darkest areas are suburban areas as we looked at it more closely, and the hash marks are places where there's so few students we didn't include that in the map. But otherwise, this gives you some sense of where students are enrolling. And you can see on the border, you see some light areas. Some of those students are probably going out of state. So that could be why they have a lower percentage of their high school graduates enrolling in higher education. But I think that's useful. Now, what this map does is the percentages on this map are the percentages that were used on the blue map to show the percent of students enrolling from that county into higher education. But on this one, we show it as a percentage on each county, and then the coloration changes have to do with the overall number of high school graduates in that county who enroll in higher education. So basically, you can see, where the really high enrollment rates are, and then in those areas, are they doing a good job in terms of the percentage of students who are enrolling? And you have to look at the percentages for that. So you can look back to the previous slide. And not surprisingly, we see the most students enrolling in our metropolitan areas, but some of the percentages are lower than others on this map. And this is these are things that we can share with you. We'll be happy to share after the meeting. Okay. I just wanted to let you know we have a Tracking Post-Secondary's Outcomes Dashboard. I hope all of the enrollment managers out there know that it's available on our website. This is information by ISD about college outcomes for students who enroll. Who's enrolling, where they're enrolling from the ISD graduates. We have something new that we haven't had before is persistence rates for students who are enrolling. We have breakouts of enrollment by economic background. So there's a wealth of data there for you enrollment managers to be looking at who's going to higher ed from different ISDs and what do those populations look like. We have readiness data. So a lot of the information we've had on our website, but this is, I think, a much more user-friendly dashboard, and we're certainly making ISDs aware of this. The reason it's here is because we're using this as part of our discussions about how can we reach our enrollment goals. We're targeting in on some of the especially larger ISDs to see what's happening, see where we're seeing some changes over time. Okay. And you can select different years. Here's the example of enrollment by economic status. Okay. Next slide. A couple of things that are going on. We have a Gentex Day on May 3rd. I'm not going to say any more about that, just wanted to mention it. And we're also looking at Summer Melt, who are the students who apply. We have applications from them. They are accepted to college, but then they don't show up enrolled anywhere. And the next slide gives a little more detail about that. We know that there's a percentage of these students who are enrolling out of state. And when we look at this by top 10%, top 25%, and everyone, we understand that there's probably a higher percentage of those top 10% students who don't show up in Texas, who are accepted somewhere, who are rolling out of states. But we also know there's a large percentage of students, because we know how many students overall enroll out of state. There's a large percentage of students who are just not showing up. They apply, they go through the process, they're accepted, and then we don't see them again. So that's something maybe we can talk with all of you about a little bit later today, see if you're seeing the same thing. Okay. Obviously, for you it can be a challenge because you don't know where else the students have applied, so it's helpful to have the statewide data for that. The meeting we're having today, we talked about a little bit yesterday in the meeting with community college folks. So this is just a little explanation that we did for the board for what has been happening with that. We talked about the flex. One thing that we were hearing from the community colleges, and this probably isn't the case with the universities, but we can talk about it. It might be for some of you who have a lot of part-time students, is that their sense was students are taking fewer hours because their employment demands are higher. They're having more trouble finding the time to get in for classes. So maybe they're taking 1 instead of 2 or 2 instead of 3. Also, some of the community colleges are doing financial literacy courses, not formal courses, but sessions, modules, that sort of thing, to work with students on understanding financial aid, understanding how finances work, how they should be thinking about aid money, loan money, making decisions about college moving onward. Okay, next slide. And this is just, keep going, this is information I already shared about how our numbers have gone up, and this is where we are. Oh, I'm sorry, if you go back, this is actually about success. I'm sorry. We have reached our success goal when we include the Career College awards, the degrees and certificates that we received this winter. So we're very happy to report that. We were just a little under our 210,000 goal for degrees and awards by 2015. I think we were about 13,500 students under, and now we're ahead because of this additional 40,000 students that we received information about on our reporting from the career colleges. Of course, we want to continue that. Next slide. You can see the trend line here with the career added to our success goals. And the next slide. This is information about, and just to fully explain this, our Hispanic students and African American students were targeted in closing the gaps for increasing the number of degrees and certificates. White students were not. So in terms of the target for how many more degrees should be awarded to Hispanics and African Americans, we've gone beyond that. White students were almost there in terms of reaching the goals. Next. So basically, we need 42,000 additional students to reach participation. We're still behind on our Hispanic targets, and that's going to be continually important, especially as we see our white population going down. We actually, for the first time this fall, saw a drop in our, or I think it was the second time we saw a drop in our white participation rates, but for the first time this fall, it moved to below our goal line for closing the gaps for white students. Some of that has to do with changing populations. As our populations shift, as the Hispanic population grows, it's going to be really important that we make the effort to enroll Hispanic students in a rate that's appropriate for our overall state population. And the success goal has been met, but this isn't the time to be complacent. It's, we're moving forward with Texas. We want to, continue that trend and encourage as many students as possible, support as many students as possible to complete, because I'm sure you've seen the persistence rates, you've seen the students who do not continue, don't get through. There's a lot of students out there who we'd like to make sure that they complete their degree. So, that said, let's very quickly go to the information that I shared with you about allocations. So, if you want to open the allocations, I sent you a large chart in the mail. This is something that we've been doing. This is actually, a lot of this is data that's already available online. We just put it in a new format. And I handed everyone kind of a one-pager about this, where I pulled out an excerpt of the data, and that's what we see. That's what we see online. But if you could grab the other tab at the bottom of that worksheet. What the coordinating board does is we, as those of you who are in IR are probably aware, we collect closing the gaps targets from institutions, and we collect those targets for participation by our major race ethnicity categories. So for African American, Hispanic, white, and other students, and we also do allocations here at the coordinating board. We just redid our allocations last week. So this is data that we haven't even sent to the community colleges yet. We didn't have it ready for them in time for their meeting. But we went in with the new population data that we have, and part of our discussions in terms of our strategy room was, we probably need to get in and redo the allocations that were done a few years ago based on this new population data. So we have new allocations that have been done, and there's several, in the larger chart, there are several categories. We look at some ratios for allocations to targets and for forecasted targets, and many of you are probably aware of the forecast that's done, and the forecast is based on if things continue the way they are at your institution, here's where we think the numbers will be, and we saw major drops in the forecast, the enrollment forecast that was done this fall at a lot of places. The trend line either really slowed, or for some community colleges especially, we saw a drop. So that's how we expect things to continue, as opposed to the allocations being This is where we need to be to get to exactly the 1,650,000 students we need to be to close the gaps. And then, of course, we have your targets, which we ask you to stretch. However, we also say it needs to be grounded in some kind of reality. So those are the targets that you send us, that the institutional research folks send us every fall. We most recently had those, I believe, in November. So what we've done for part of this project is we've put all this information kind of in one chart. We've included several of the ratios, and we added a new enrollment to allocation ratio. And that's what I want to focus on now, because this has to do with the fall 2012 enrollment and where you looking at fall 2012 enrollment and then where the allocation says that your institution should be. And the key piece to understand here is that all the numbers have to add up in terms of our ethnicity numbers, building into our final targets, because we do have the targets disaggregated by our race ethnicity groups. So the important thing to understand here is that the numbers, because they all need to add up, what you're going to see in terms of our African American enrollment and that enrollment to allocation is that institutions are above the target. You'll see the ratios are 1.07, 1.05, 1.11. This does not mean, as I said before, that your institutions don't need to enroll additional African American students. It just, because of how the allocations are done, and because we look at the different groups and what our targets are and were set for in 2005 for our Hispanic population, for our African American population, for our white population. You see a little bit of, I think, what can be misleading in terms of that allocation, and also when you look at our HBCUs here, Texas Southern and Prairie View, we also see that they are above in some areas. And I'm looking at this. I'm trying to follow down to here. Where's my? Here we go. Yes, we see Prairie View as near the top at 1.08, where most institutions are less than 1 in terms of when you look at their enrollment to allocations. So again, we're making good progress, but it's important for your institutions to look and see where you need to be. One of the main reasons we wanted to supply this, and that you see on this handout, is if you look at, for our Hispanic enrollment allocation, which is the last column on the left, and I think the Hispanic on the top got cut off. So first we have the first column is our overall, then we have our African American, and the last one is our Hispanic, and that probably shows up there. You see our institutions have a long way to go from where our targets were set for our Hispanic enrollment and where the institutions currently stand. So I wanted to point that out. This can be helpful information. Again, an allocation, it's just done by taking here are our targets for these different groups and raking the information back, looking at area populations, looking at where students usually come from, looking at any kind of capacity levels if an institution has capped its enrollment, considering that. So there are a lot of considerations that go into this. It's just an exercise to give you all an understanding of where you stand in terms of where you stand next compared to other institutions, or where you might need to be. But because of some of our changes, some of what I shared with you where we've had stronger growth, it does affect these results. And I do want to point out, when we talk about the African American enrollment trend, which is very strong, that when you disaggregate that information by gender, it looks very different. We are doing very well in terms of enrolling African American females across the state, and we're not doing nearly as well in terms of enrolling African American males. So that's something that's really important to focus on, and our accelerated Closing the Gaps plan actually does include focus on that group as well as Hispanic males. We see some of the same patterns with males across many of our groups, not so much with Asian enrollment, but certainly with white, Hispanic, and African American enrollment. So those are students who it's important to work with. It's a good half of our population too. So there's definitely a lot of students we hope we can reach. The final thing I want to do, because we want to move on to our discussion, is just quickly tell you what I sent to you in terms of the other handouts. The one that talks about enrollment, what I did is I just went into the accountability system and into the interactive system and asked to pull out some different comparative data. And I wanted folks to know, if you're not aware of this function or if you haven't used it, it's very, very valuable if you want to make comparisons across institutions or across years. We've got data back to 2000 in the accountability system. We keep these measures almost across the board. We keep them consistent, so if we change how something is calculated, we go back to 2000 when we recalculate all the data the same way. So you're looking at comparable data. There are definitions in accountability in a couple places that we can't do that, but for the most part, especially for things like enrollment and persistence, you're looking at the same methodology in all the years. So this is very helpful data. You can slice it and dice it all different kinds of ways. You can ask for it in an Excel format. I assume all of you here are all, I shouldn't ask it that way, most of you here familiar with this interactive function? Yeah. But I did want, for enrollment managers, I know our IR people are very aware of it. I wanted enrollment managers to know it's there. It's very, very useful. So I gave you a couple of different handouts. One is transfers, and then there's this one. So that's what we have for data. A lot of information because of our update. I'm going to take a look and see if we have any questions. Not yet. Are there any questions from the group before we move on to the next part of our presentation? Okay, well, thank you very much. And Dr. Laredo?
Thank you, Dr. Eklund. We're going to do something fun now that our kids do all the time, and that's get on the telephone and respond to messages or texting or whatever. But we're going to pose some questions, and we call it our e-poll. And so if you have your cell phone with you and you're able to text, you will be texting your answer to each question to the number listed on the screen. For those of you in cyberspace, the same thing applies. If you will get your cell phone and you will enter 22333 to the questions that are posed. This way we can have some interactive participation. So question number 1. Are you anticipating an increase in enrollment at your institution for the coming academic year? You're going to be texting your answer again to 22333. If your answer is no, then then you'll text in CTG1. And I think if its answer is yes, then it'll be CTG2. We're having a little trouble with the screen. Are you anticipating an increase in enrollment? Answer for no is CTG1. Answer for yes is CTG2. As you can see how the responses are coming in, what it does. Those of you out in that cyber world can respond as well. We're watching the results as they're coming in, so we can tell how many have responded. Well, that's holding pretty good at the yes. Oh, they're still coming in. Gary was just saying the community college systems, when they responded, it was 50-50 just about on the answers for no and yes. So there's definitely an increase on your side of the house, as it appears right now by those responding. Okay, let's go on to our next question. If yes, do you attribute the increase to new enrollment, CTG3, persistence, CTG4, or both, CTG5? I'm waiting to get closer to the total result number. We're not too far from it. Yeah, that's right. Okay, let's go to the next question. If no, do you attribute the lack of an increase to fewer new enrollments, CTG6, policy changes, CTG7, reduced persistence, CTG8? If no, do you attribute the lack of an increase to
That's probably about it, because we
Yeah.
had 38.
And our last question on this part of the e-poll is, yeah,
Well, we had
Yeah.
38 initially, then we had...
but these are the answers to no. Yeah,
Yeah.
okay. Go to the next one, Mary. Our last question on this part is, do you still allow late registration? No, CTG9, and yes, CTG10. Do you still allow late registration?
I wonder if many of these institutions have never allowed late registration. Would that be the case? How many of you have never allowed late registration? Just one? Oh, two? A couple? Okay, thanks.
Interesting, because with our community colleges, I think it was 85% that said they do not allow late registration anymore. Which is interesting. They have flex entries, you know.
How is late registration defined for a university? Is it? I assume it's before the first class day, or is it actually after classes start? Okay, so the same way. So someone registering after school has already begun. Okay, thank you.
Before the 12th class day.
Okay, but that's generally community colleges. After the 12th class day is going to be after the census date, so.
Okay. That's all our e-poll right now. Now we're going to go to some actual questions where we're going to ask you to please feel free to raise your hand. We'll bring the microphone around to you and give us your thoughts. If you'll identify yourself, that would also be helpful. First question, have you seen any patterns in student behavior or the general education environment that may be helpful in understanding the slowing institutional and statewide enrollments. Those of you in cyberspace, please feel free to send your response via email, or of course if you have a question you want to post, and on the screen we'll repost the email address so you can see it. Again, the question: have you seen any patterns in student behavior or the general education environment that may be helpful in understanding the slowing institutional and statewide enrollments? I know somebody out there has a burning thought. And if you're going to speak, also those who have a mic in front, you just punch that little red button. But there's one in the back. I'll give.
I'm with Sil Ross, Rio Grande College, and Sil Ross State University. And yeah, we've seen several interesting experiences, particularly in the Rio Grande area where I primarily work, with the Eagle Ford Shale, students going to work in the oil field, and also on our main campus in Alpine, we've seen particularly males. A little tidbit, Eagle Pass School District had to alter their schedule because they couldn't get enough bus drivers, because the oil field was hiring everybody that had a commercial license and paying them, significant amount of money. The other thing that hurt us real bad was the legislature cutting school funding. They quit hiring teachers, and 60% of our students are in teacher-ed programs, and they just quit coming to school. They said, if there's not going to be a job, why should I go to school? I said, well, they'll come back, but no, they weren't going to go to school.
That is interesting. That affects your persistence for sure. Up here in the front, I think you had a... Did somebody in the front have a comment? Anyone else want to respond to that? Anything else you might have noticed?
This is Michael Heinze from Texas State University. I think one of the trends that we've seen, or right away, begin to present itself is the effect of the new federal SAP financial aid guidelines on new transfer students. I think, and I've heard it from my colleagues and friends at community colleges, that they are also experiencing some issues with that.
Anyone on the right side of the room have a comment that you'd like to add to that? If not, let's go to our next question. What is your institution doing to meet participation targets? What is your institution doing to meet participation targets? Is there anything new you've enacted, connection with high schools, work with your P16 councils in your area, your business and industry folks?
This is Barbara Lerner, Texas Women's University. I don't know where to begin on that one, Judy. I suppose, yes, working with high schools, extending information to high school counselors. We're holding a counselor conference in the middle of May to work more generally with high school counselors and inform them about dual credit opportunities, explaining the differences between dual credit, AP, IB, all of that. I think there's a lot of confusion about that. In general, I think working with transfer institutions, and of course we're a large transfer institution, so facilitating transfer, making clear articulation agreements. Many of these practices, though, have been going on for a long time, so I could go on. But.
Are you finding that you're getting good responses with those practices?
Many of them, as you can imagine, are hard to document. TWU is one of those few four-year institutions that also does dual credit. I think we see some growth in that area, beginning to track dual credit students who then matriculate at the university following their participation in dual credit. Increasing that participation with additional districts, I think, is a goal of ours. It is very difficult on some of these efforts to actually document whether a particular effort resulted in a particular enrollment. I think we like to assume that they are best practices that overall contribute to that factor. But if you can give us some help in how to document that, we'd appreciate that. Information about particular district participation is very helpful, so that we can see if we are interacting with a particular district, if we are seeing growth at our institution from that district.
One thing I will mention related to that is we're required to post information, and TEA is now, in fact, collecting summer dual credit information, but I think it's September 13, resulting from a bill that went through in the 82nd legislature, so the last session, information about dual credit enrollment by ISD, as opposed to we now have it, you're probably aware we have it online by higher ed institutions, so that might be helpful to you. And I also wanted to mention, if there's any data that we can provide to you, and more importantly, if there's anything that we can run for all of the institutions and put online, because that's the most efficient way for us to do it. Please give us your ideas, your thoughts. We would like to be able to help you, and we have some data that you don't have, and especially in terms of transfer student movement across the system. So we try to, most of what you see when you go online, or much of what you see, is a result of inquiries that come to us, and we realize everyone's interested in this information that we've been asked for from different folks. So, but I'm sure there might be additional things that would be helpful, and especially as part of this discussion of how we increase our participation at a time when, we're not sure where we're headed in terms of those goals when we've seen the slowed growth. So please do let me know, especially if you have any suggestions for data. We can also run data requests for individual institutions. We don't have a huge staff, so that can be challenging, but especially if there are things that would be helpful, that we think would be helpful to everyone, we'd like to get those out there for you.
I think we have another comment.
I'm Margaret Deckent with Texas A&M University Corpus Christi. In addition to everything that's been mentioned already, in Corpus Christi, we are working with our P through 16 council, and we will be opening soon what we're calling the Coastal Campus Center, which is located at the local mall in Corpus Christi, Texas. And it is similar to the program that they have in San Antonio, so we're trying to mimic that exact program in Corpus Christi in order to facilitate college awareness locally. And in addition to that, at Texas A&M University Corpus Christi, we have a partnership with our local community college, Del Mar College, and we actually in partnership with them, we have a transfer advisor located at the community college, and she's there twice a week. And Del Mar College has been terrific about getting the word out to students at the community college, and so we have quite a few visitors. We've just initiated that this fall, so we're hoping to track the numbers and see how effective that is. But so far, the students are very appreciative to have an advisor right there on campus to help facilitate the transfer, admission, and advising process.
She's referencing San Antonio's efforts around Gentex San Antonio. It's a huge involvement of every major business and industry in that city, and it's yielded a lot of positive results in terms of their connection to their 16 school systems, to the community college, because I think they have 6 campuses in San Antonio, and then the universities that are also located there, the public plus the private, and they have a full staff that is working with the P16 councils to do this work. So it's really a robust model, but it's definitely worked, and it's taken a lot to get it mobilized. I think there's.
I just wanted to add, if you don't mind, what's really terrific about the San Antonio model is that they involve all the other community colleges and universities in the state of Texas, and they welcome us into their area and help facilitate programming that we can all be a part of. So I think all of our institutions here participate in that.
Thank you.
Yes, my name is Jesse Acosta. I'm with the University of Texas at Tyler. A population we've been successful with are the veterans, and we've created a Veterans Resource Center to actually facilitate the incorporation of veterans on our campus, and it's helping us not just in the recruiting piece, but also in the retention of the veterans as they matriculate back into society.
That's a huge population. I think we all know that. Those that are coming back from serving and have been out of the workforce, you know, when I say workforce, out of their workforce in their own communities, that's a huge population that we probably should reach out to as you look at your participation numbers. Did you have something?
I had a couple of questions, or actually a couple of comments come in. And I also wanted to mention that for folks who are listening in who are on the conference call, you're welcome to unmute and ask questions that way too. We have a small group here today, so we'll certainly hear you and let you know if it's not the right time. We'll certainly welcome you in a moment to make your comment. But I did have a couple of comments from Stephen F. Austin State University. One was in response to the question, what is the institution doing to meet participation targets? And they are targeting non-traditional areas for their institutions, doing some social media outreach, and doing personal contact in non-traditional areas. And that's from Karen Hall, if she is listening in and wants to elaborate on that. She also wrote in terms of patterns that they're seeing. They're seeing unprepared students who are not persisting. They're seeing students who feel like they are her comment is people who are not ready to go to college but are pushed to do so, and those students are not necessarily persisting at the rates of other students, and also that loans, debt, and non-preparedness are contributing to those students who are not continuing. So just some general comments about their students who aren't continuing to persist.
Oh, go ahead. That's fine.
You know, yesterday at the board meeting, if some of you were here, you know that the board did approve the new TSI assessment, which is really the first of its kind in not only Texas, but certainly first of its kind in the nation, because it will be able to not only determine students who are college ready, but those students who need developmental education, and most importantly, the students that fall in that ABE category, that are below high school level performance. For the first time, this test will be able to do that with a diagnostic component so that you know what the student's strengths and weaknesses are. In terms of your institutions, if you accept any students on condition that may have some deficiencies, the results of that test would let you know how deep that deficiency is and whether or not your institution is in the position to be able to provide that remediation. And so this is brand new. It's going to be rolled out for the first time this fall, but it certainly is going to be available to you with students who have taken it previously who may be applying to your institutions. And keep in mind, the only students that will take this test will be the ones who are not deemed college ready in high school. If they're deemed college ready in high school, you may not retest them. But in answer, I think, to her comment where they're getting some students that are not prepared, this should be a more positive tool for universities as you look at those students that you might accept on a conditional basis.
I'm Rick Berry. I'm from Stephen F. Austin State, so I may just piggyback on what my colleague Karen Hall emailed in. Two other things that we're doing, not unique, but they're working well for us. One is substantial involvement in the DP's Texas P16 Council. Really, Angelina College, our community college to the south, and Stephen F. Austin are the driving forces in Angelina County and Nacogdoches County, and we're getting great participation from the school districts in the two counties as well as from businesses in Lufkin and in Nacogdoches, and I think we're going to see some real benefits from that. The second thing I might mention is that we work with currently 2 independent school districts in Nacogdoches County. We have worked with them in establishing early college high schools that our campus is a venue for, and so we're getting a substantial increase in dual enrollment in that way, and we believe that'll translate into some long-range gains for us as well.
Any other comments? If not, let's go to our third question. What could the coordinating board do to help you increase persistence and/or success in the short term at your institution? What could the coordinating board do to help you increase persistence and/or success in the short term? at your institution? I know somebody has a thought for that.
This is Joe Meyer at Texas State University. A couple of weeks ago, UT Austin sponsored a FERPA conference here in Austin that I attended, and there were some good presentations there about data sharing agreements between universities and higher education agencies that had been established in other states. And the U.S. Department of Education FERPA representatives talked about their willingness to review such arrangements and to help institutions establish such arrangements that were compliant with FERPA rules. Given some of the recent changes in FERPA rules, I think it would be helpful if the coordinating board reached out to some of the FERPA representatives and investigated whether there were some ways to improve data sharing. Some of the reports that are currently on the the coordinating board website are not really specific enough to help us draw actionable conclusions. There just isn't quite enough detail there, and I think the coordinating board concerns there are FERPA related.
Yes, I think some of the concerns are FERPA related, and we do have instances where institutions will send us students and will send back information. So I think some of it also has to do with availability of resources. But I think it's a very good point. And our general counsel has been keeping up with the FERPA changes. As you know, we have ERCs, and we have so. That's another venue for individuals to get access to data. But I understand you're looking at, rather than complicated research projects, you're thinking about just getting some basic information about groups of students now that you're not able to get at this point in time. Is that?
Yeah, just to make it a little bit easier. I know that we could send in listings of students and so forth, but it can be time consuming, and so it would be nice if we could simplify the data sharing a little bit.
Thank you. I'll be sure to share that with our accountability with Susan Brown and the other folks on the staff. Thanks.
As I mentioned, the military target, the veteran target for our population, future populations, my friend from Salt Ross whispered in my ear and reminded me that that's certainly an attractive population, but it comes with very little funding because of the Hazelwood impact, and that would be a coordinating board support to allow the legislature now to start taking some of that burden off the institutions that we carry because of that burden, that growing veteran population.
There has been a bill introduced that would provide at least some money for reimbursing institutions for the Hazelwood costs. And as I understand it, they were looking at something like $30 million. And I don't know if it's a one-time only thing or something they will look at continuing, but at least they're aware of the growing costs of Hazelwood and are trying to examine opportunities to try to ease some of that burden for the institutions.
On another issue, and also probably a hot topic, something called low-producing programs. And in our situation, we have a number of low-producing programs that are right on the edge, but no flexibility is being given to closing those programs. It's pretty hard to recruit a student to a program. You say, well, maybe we'll get an exemption, maybe we won't. I know there's legislation coming through that's going to remove that authority. At the same time, we were told, day before yesterday, that you still have to file your reports, and because you don't know what's going to happen to them. So if there could be some flexibility given on that to say, all right, that's going to be shifting back, we're not going to fool with it. A lot of our students are place-bound, and when you say we don't have your program, they don't go to college. They don't go somewhere else. They don't go drive off somewhere. They just don't go to college. Well, about closing the gaps, then there's a gap.
That, as you said, that is a legislative issue that is out there this year, and I would think that you always have the appeal process, and if you are close, as you said, I would recommend you put that information together and move forward. And obviously, I think at the end of the legislative session, we'll have to potentially reevaluate that process in its entirety.
Well, no, I understand that, and I agree, but I sat in this very room and saw somebody that was one away give a detailed and incredible discussion of 2 hurricanes and their difficulty, and they were not given an exemption. Sort of makes it discouraging. You need to go through all the paperwork and the process to do that, and you were asking about short-term fixes, so that's why I mentioned that. There's some flexibility in that regard.
I'm going to switch hats. Catherine Parsoneau, currently at Texas Tech, but before February, 20 years on the coordinating board staff. I know that part of the low-producing programs discussion in the last few months that I was on staff, and I think Gary was in some of these meetings also, revolved around the fact that the people on staff involved with low-producing programs sought advice from both the Undergraduate Education Advisory Committee and the Graduate Education Advisory Committee. And one of the recommendations that was, when I left, on the docket to be discussed this year was in considering requests for temporary exemptions to particularly consider regional institutional and program availability. And I don't think that ever dropped off the radar. I think the legislative session has shifted some concerns and priorities there. But Paul, I do think that as that process was in progress toward being a little bit better refined and defined, I think that some of those regional concerns were very much on the table and were high on coordinating board staff radar. We didn't get everything right, we coordinating board staff, the first time through, and it was one of those things where, as things went on, we expected hopefully to refine it and make it a better process for everyone. Gary, you're closer to it now than I am, but if you have anything else to say.
Well, I agree with that. There is ongoing conversation and dialogue. We understand it from your point of view, and we are trying to take multiple things into consideration. And of course, obviously, we have to listen to what is happening across the way at the Capitol and try to figure out exactly what is the best plan. And yes, we don't want to throw barriers in the way of students if the programs are producing. But I think obviously that the low producing program review process in its entirety, to comment about it right now is kind of almost a moot point until we actually see what happens out of the Capitol. And then, as Catherine said, if we still have that authority, then we'll obviously look at comments and how do we respond appropriately and move forward with it in the interest of the state as a whole.
And I would add, I think regardless of the legislation, Senator Seliger has made it clear that he really values the information and values the attention that coordinating board staff are paying to this and the attention that they're sharing with universities. So I think, while the authority to require a closure or consolidation may change, there's still the responsibility to make well-considered and thoughtful recommendations to boards of regents who are a little closer maybe to the regional concerns and needs. So again, I think maybe through refining the process with or without the help of the legislature, maybe this can become a better situation for everybody.
I also just want to add, in terms of the data, one thing that we did include this time, we had it 2 years ago also, but with more detail this time in our regional plan, is information about the low-producing programs organized by region. So you're able to go in and look at other institutions in your region by program area and see if there are other institutions nearby that have the same program and what the production level is in terms of the degrees for that other program. If there's other low-producing programs in the area that you might wish to discuss with those other institutions, is there something we could collaborate on? Or if there's another institution nearby that has a program that has a higher enrollment, and it might be worthwhile to have a discussion with them for other reasons. So we did want to provide that regional information to everyone at this point, and as Catherine said, it was a discussion that was going on beyond just providing the data that but that is out there if you would like to access it and have those comparisons.
And we probably need to not get too far adrift in low-producing programs, but I think it is important to point out, and I don't have the numbers in front of me, but since the initial process, the number this year is, Jose, do you know the number? No. I think it's 108 programs total or something. Okay, Catherine's saying 86. So it looks like the process actually, initially, I believe the number was 621, and I may be misspeaking, so don't quote me on that. But it was a much larger number, and as the process has been worked a couple of years, it's a much smaller number. And I think an important point is there's about 9,000 programs at the community colleges and the universities on the book. So we're kind of talking about 1%. And I understand if it's your 1%, your passion. I'm not saying that it's okay, but I think it is a process that has some merit, but it's somehow it fits into the entire equation.
To take the conversation back to the question at hand, which is what could the CB do to help increase persistence short term? We're channeling some of the people on our campus who are tuned in and watching. And Dr. Juan Munoz, who's the Vice Provost for Undergraduate Education and Vice President for Institutional Diversity, Equity, and Community Engagement, would like to ask, in general, what kind of support is CB staff discussing? Maybe you could talk a little bit about the legislative agenda in terms of recruitment incentives or financial incentives to be able to use in recruiting students. And I know this has been one of the coordinating board's top targets for legislative action is to increase financial aid, but I think Juan may be thinking a little bit shorter term.
Would this be a good time to talk about some of the reverse transfer initiatives? Okay.
It might be the. Go ahead.
I think with the reverse transfer, there's a couple bills during this session that have actually gone through committee, and it's just reducing the number of hours for the reverse transfer from 90 to 80. I think one of them is 66, and the other one is almost a similar number. We've had some discussions around the state looking at the issue and how to improve the process, because I think that's what the issue on this program lies on. I think what the coordinating board is trying to do is just get some guidelines out there for the reverse transfer. We're also going to be working with UT Systems so that we can create a better process for both 4-year institutions and 2-year institutions to improve the program itself. So that discussion is going to happen very, very soon. So again, as soon as we know more about the process of or this group that is meeting, we will get information out there about this information.
Go ahead.
I also wanted to mention in terms of trying to assist institutions, especially with in improving their participation rates, as well as the success rates, because this ties to both of those. We will again be producing lists of students who have at least 90 hours to send out to the institutions. But here's the twist on it for this time, because what we heard from community colleges when we sent them lists, because we send them lists of students who have completed 55 hours, who are close to the associate level, they've given us feedback that most of the time they can't find those students. But we are now we are working with DPS in Texas to try to get student addresses through them. So it's the addresses that are used for driver's license and people tend to keep those up to date a little more maybe than their contact information with the institutions they formerly attended. It looks like that's information that we're going to be able to get here, and we're going to put resources into sending mailings out to students who are at that point. If we don't find them anywhere else in the system, we'll look through and make sure they're not enrolled somewhere else. But if we find students who have 90 hours, they're not enrolled, we will send them information about our GradTex website, encourage them to get in touch with their local institution or the institution where they were working on their degree, and we hope that that'll be a short-term way that we can help you in terms of getting students back into your systems.
Did Jane want to say anything?
Two brief comments. One, going back to programs, there's a flip side of the low-producing program issue, and that is the high-producing program issue. And one of the things that you have done already is providing that information about programs so that we can evaluate not only the success of our own programs, but begin to look across the state at what programs are flourishing, as well as the mode of delivery of those programs. For us, excuse me, for us, a number of online or hybrid programs, I think, increase our participation rates because we have non-traditional students. So the opportunity to look not only at what is not working, but also to look at what is working and perhaps to create or enhance programs that do have appeal to students because they are programs from which students are graduating and getting jobs. The other piece, just very quickly, in regards to reverse transfer, I think that the major issues that we have encountered have not been in terms of agreement, because we have no issues with the community colleges, but there are often issues in terms of consistent transcription and getting that information back and forth from the four-year institution to the two-year institution. And so any work that the coordinating board can do in conjunction with TACRO or others to help facilitate transcripts and the ease of sending transcripts back and forth, I think would be helpful.
Yeah, and I think that that's going to be one of the discussions that we're going to, that is on the agenda. Not just sending the transcripts, but have a standard format or a standard way to identify those transcripts as reverse transfer. So that is part of the discussion.
That was one of our questions on our paper on reverse transfers. Did anybody else have a comment they might like to add? And then I'm going to see if Jane wanted to say something about the financial aid and package here at the agency.
As all of you know, 2 years ago, with the economic situation the state was in, we had a number of programs that were zero funded. And what we're seeing in the current session is that the primary programs that were continued at that time were proposed for additional funding. As you probably also know, both the House and the Senate have their own versions of the appropriations bill, and those two sets of numbers at this point in time are still far from being in agreement with one another. We are encouraged in that there's no indication of programs being cut any further, and there's certainly some support to increase funding for programs such as Texas Grant, TEOG, and the TEG program. Again, it will all we'll learn what actually comes out the other end of this whole process probably in another month or so. One thing that I wanted to mention is that we have a significant financial aid reporting system that your financial aid officers submit data to once a year. We generate a report for the legislature based on the information we receive from the institutions. And within that report, there is a table that shows by institution the number of awards, dollar amounts awarded not only in state programs but also federal programs. If you're unfamiliar with that report, it's something that you might find really useful as a way to compare what's happening at your institution versus other institutions in the state. The underlying data is a student-by-student database, but at this point in time, we don't have a system set up to allow queries to be run against the student-level data. But we do have a great deal of information from that report in the report that goes to the legislature, and that is posted on our website. We can maybe make that information more readily available if people are interested in that.
To follow up the comment about the existing program review tool that's on the website, there's a lot of information there. If you're not utilizing that, you can go in and look and compare yourself to other institutions of your size or that have similar programs. You also could go look at the community colleges and see what programs they have where they're graduating a large number of students and potentially figure out, is there a pathway of getting these students into my program? And again, I think it's one of those, as these tools are developed, we don't do them in isolation. There are people that are working with us as we put these things together and put them out there. But if they need to be refined or enhancements, or if we don't have the right tools out there, then talk to us and we'll try to get it done. We probably won't have it done next week, but we certainly are open, and that's what this session is about, is listening and trying to figure out how do we help.
One thing I want to add about that, we have had really positive feedback from faculty about the existing program review. I think often if you have challenges with getting faculty engaged with data, especially state-level data, institutional-level data, it doesn't resonate with them the same way as for them to be able to go in and look at their program, and it's by 4-digit SIP, and look at some of the student persistence for the students who declare that major as a junior. Are they there as a senior? What's happening in terms of graduation? There's really a granularity of data there that we haven't seen, or we often aren't able to show in the reports we put out. We really went pretty deep into the program areas and the outcomes. In the past we've shown in the prep system the program areas. So I would encourage you to share that with faculty members, because it really, I think, can be a good way to get them engaged in the conversation and not have it go back to, well, that's the institutional data and my program is different. Well, it is, programs really do vary, but this is a way to see that detail, which might get to some of the questions Joe had about needing a little more specific data. And we understand there's other ways that it's needed, but I hope that type of thing is helpful. Yes?
Julie, this was one of the last projects I worked on before I left the coordinating board, and I do want to just reinforce what you said. I used for all of the low-producing programs, the few that we had that were at the bachelor's level, I used this existing undergraduate program review system with the associate deans and faculty in those programs, and it blew them away. They were so happy to see the data and engaged with it and intrigued with it. So I'm in the process of preparing a little presentation. I hope I'll be able to shop around on the campus, but I think we will build this into our continuing monitoring of programs, because our goal, of course, is to be zero low-producing programs. So it's a wonderful tool, and I think all of the areas of the coordinating board staff who worked to develop it, it was wonderful collaboration and deeply appreciated.
Let's go to our e-poll again. We have a few more questions we want to ask you. Question number 1. Does your institution have flexible tuition and fee installment plans? Again, the text number is 22333. And if your answer is no to the question, you will enter CTG 11. Does your institution have flexible tuition and fee installment plans? If it is yes, it will be CTG 12.
I'd like to give a little background to this question. Not too long ago, our statutes indicated your installment plan could be pay it all up front or pay a half in front and 2 quarter payments before the end of the term. And within the last few years, last couple of sessions, the restrictions in that statute have been significantly lessened, so that institutions have a huge amount of flexibility in what they can choose to do in collecting the tuition and fee payments from your students. At a time when the economy is slow, your middle-income families might find this to be one of the tools that could really help them enroll and afford to come to your institution. But if you haven't looked at that statute for a while, you'd be amazed at how much flexibility is now in it. And that is section Texas Education Code, section 54.007.
Again, the question, does your institution have flexible tuition and fee installment plans? CTG 11 for no, CTG 12 for yes. Our next question, does your institution allow students with pending aid to enroll on an accounts receivable basis? Does your institution allow students with pending aid to enroll on an accounts receivable basis? CTG 13 for no and CTG 14 for yes.
I'll again give a little bit of background to this question. I was working from home one weekend and sent an email to a college and got a response from that college right away. And I sent them a note saying, what are you doing working on the weekend? And it was the aid officer saying, if I don't find some aid for this student or if I don't get some cash for this student before Monday, they're going to be dropped from all their classes. There is a statute in its chapter, Texas Education Code, chapter 540071, that indicates that an institution may, but is not required, to allow a student with pending financial aid. It's aid that they have been proven to be eligible for, but the cash is not there at time of payment of tuition and fees. To allow the student to go ahead and enroll, the hours count towards formula funding, and then when the money comes in, the school receives the tuition and fee payment and the balance can be released to the student. Since it's optional, there's some schools who don't do it. It's just a good thing to check and see if your institution is indeed allowing that to happen.
Our next question, last question on the e-poll, does your institution have a healthy emergency loan program for tuition, fees, and books? Does your institution have a healthy emergency loan program for tuition, fees, and books? CTG 15 for no, CTG 16 for yes.
One more set of background, a bit of background information. The funding source for at least the main emergency loan program I'm familiar with is tuition set-asides for the Texas Public Education Grant. Every college is required to set money aside for that grant program, but in statute you may also set aside up to 10% of that money each year into an emergency loan program. This has been in place for a long time, and a lot of institutions set aside money to begin with for their loan program, but then once they felt that they had enough in that program, they quit increasing that the loan corpus and have been letting all of the money go to grants. If you are now running low on your emergency loan program funds, you might want to negotiate between your business office and financial aid office about whether you want to go back and start putting some more of that TPEG money into the emergency loan program because that program is a revolving fund. It's a short-term loan, 90-day loan, so the money can be loaned out, returned, loaned out again, while a grant, which everyone wants to receive, is paid once and then it's gone. Financial aid officers in general hate to give up on the grant money, but this is something that your institution can look at and decide whether you should, at least for a while, allow some more money to go into that emergency loan program, build it up a little bit more, and then you can stop that when you need. If you ever get to where you have too much in your emergency loan program, you can transfer back out to TPEG. But if it's running short now, it's again a good way to help your families, middle-income families as well as others, pay those bills. That's in Chapter 56, Subchapter D of the Texas Education Code.
Our last question, and we're cognizant of your time and commitment to having come here today, is the following. Has your institution adapted, modified, or eliminated any local policies which might have influence on enrollment? Have your institutions adapted, modified, or eliminated any local policies which might have influence on enrollment? I guess not.
Yeah, this isn't an e-poll.
There's a question.
Hi, I'm S.J. Sethi with the University of Texas Pan American. The one major change that we have made as far as policy, we used to have a lot of holds for everything on enrollment. For example, if a student had not paid their library dues, there was a hold on their enrollment. We've gotten rid of a lot of such holds, which is making a difference in allowing students to enroll. What we've done is instead of the hold on enrollment, it's become a hold on getting their grades. So they can still enroll, but if they want their grades, they need to take care of whatever is pending because of the hold.
Any other comments? I just want to thank you for the time that you've taken to be with us, for those of you in cyberspace who have connected to us. Let me tell you what our next steps are, and so also that you will know if after you leave here you have some burning thoughts or comments or questions that you might like to pose, you can do that by sending it to Mary, M-A-R-Y, Commerford, COMERFORD at thecb.state.tx.us. So you don't have to, if you don't have anything else to say today, it's not a problem, but something comes to your mind later. Let me explain how we do this process. A week from now, it takes us about a week to get the information after it's been downloaded. And Mary, and I want to thank her, my secretary, transcribed all the minutes from last time, and she'll be doing it again for this time. Those minutes then become part of our dialogue at our Friday meetings. And so today we will be presenting the dialogue from the last meeting. So it'll be 2 weeks before we as a group will sit and look at the responses that we've gotten from you to see if there are those that we may need to respond back to you or things that we may have to do internally, so that as we move forth with trying to watch these numbers and see how we can have a much better participation number by the fall, this is what drives that decision. So we will communicate with you again soon after so that you will know what we are doing in this process. I don't know if Julie or any of you all would like to add something. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I'd be happy to. I'll send those out to everyone who RSVP'd for the meeting. I've actually had some people already write in and ask for them. So I know certainly the first PowerPoint, the second one was from the board meeting, and I may be able to send the full one, which some of it didn't directly relate, but you might be interested to see it. But I'll definitely send the portion that I did. Oh, no, I'll send those out. I can get those out this afternoon if I can get the mailing list. We just won't have the
transcription from this meeting she won't have it for another week. It takes, because someone else is doing that since we're doing this in cyberspace. So when she gets that, then it takes her a couple of days to be able to do it. Did you have a comment, Mary?
Well, I was going to ask if you
Yes, we could.
people are coming to Vicky's house one.
That's an excellent idea because we can put the community college PowerPoint that we did, some of these handouts. If people write in suggestions, we can do that. Jane just said that she can provide the link to the report that she was discussing earlier. We'll provide the link to the existing program review. That we discussed. So that'll be there. So, but I'll send the PowerPoint out.
We have a banner in our strategic planning room that says pathways to closing the gaps. So that's a thought. That would help, and then this way we can keep communicating with you. Yesterday, Dr. Gardner did give a very brief presentation on the update with closing the gaps, but because they were running out of time, he had to cut it short, and I think that's what you're referencing, those slides that...
Right. I used some of those slides for the second half of my presentation, but we'll see if we can provide all of them or the ones that I used today that were basically data focused. Yeah, those are the ones I selected.
And the same thing applies, the slide presentation that was used for the TSI assessment. It helps with the one that had the talking points because you can go right through it and you can really understand the makeup of that test and how that phase-in is going to work for those of you that do have some small DevEd programs on your campus and may be administering this exam for students that are coming in and not deemed college ready.
And as I said before, if you've done any kind of analysis that you'd like to share with us, as I was talking about some of the things we'd received from the community college folks, please do feel free to send them to me, any new ways of looking at data or thinking about data, and any suggestions that you have for what we can do, and certainly in terms of data, in terms of helping you with these issues, but also in terms of anything that you didn't raise today, but that you'd like to mention, ways that the coordinating board can support you in trying to improve our participation and success.
Anybody up here have any comments or anything else you'd like to say? Anybody out there? If not, you've got an email address. You know how you can reach us, and we certainly know how to reach you. Again, we want to thank you for coming in. I know it's a Friday, and this is the days you like to close up your office and at least have a few days off, but we really appreciate it. This is extremely important to the agency and certainly important to your institutions and the kids out there as we move forward.
And I just got an email from Judy Schooling, who's the assistant to our commissioner, and she did put the presentation online, the Closing the Gaps presentation, which included the slides in my second presentation. They're online now. She provided me with the link, and it's a very long one, unfortunately. So I think if you go to the main website, hopefully you'll be able to track through where we have. I think you go. It's index. I'm trying to think the best way to provide this. I think we'll send the link if you aren't able to find it. It is online, which means that, we can provide that as well as sending the other.
We'll send it to you.
Yeah, I apologize. I don't want to try to read this.
Thank you, and please have a safe trip home.
Thank you.